we all grind this game, it's no question that Overwatch can be incredibly frustrating. From Losers Queue to ELO Hell, when I stream Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6 p.m. CST, I get so many questions about how do you climb when you have throwing teammates, terrible tanks, poor compositions, toxicity, and Losers Queue. So in this video, we're going to break down everything you need to know to defeat Losers Queue, climb from ELO Hell, and dominate the ladder. But do me a solid and smash that like, subscribe, and let's jump into it. Now, first off, we got to talk about throwing or bad teammates. Now, we got to make a distinction here because just because someone is playing very badly does not mean that they're throwing intentionally. And you got to understand that if you have a player on your team that is literally throwing intentionally, like the whole game, they aren't trying, they're charging into spawn, they're AFK, that's one, reportable, and two, you're not going to be able to win those games, unfortunately. That's just the reality of ranked. Now, this is not going to happen to you like even 5% of the time. It's going to happen every once in a while, and it's going to suck, but it could also happen to the enemy teams just as likely, actually more likely, because you yourself are never going to throw, hopefully. And yeah, it's a little bit of variance that is frustrating to deal with, but you can't really do anything about it. Now, bad teammates is a tricky one, especially if that player is around your same rank. They have good and bad games just like you do. And just because they're playing really bad, even through part of the game, does not mean that you're going to lose that game the entire way through unless their mistakes cause you to create mistakes. So what I would really suggest you do is make sure that just because a person is playing very, very badly at the start or through part of the game, think of ways in which you can either, one, adapt your pick or play style to play around your teammate, or two, try to focus on your own play, going above and beyond, comboing and coordinating with the players that you can on your team to overcome whatever that bad player is doing. Now, just like the throwing teammates thing, sometimes you're going to have a whole bunch of teammates that are very, very hard to work with. You're going to do a lot and you're still going to lose. That's also the reality of ranked. You're only one person in a 5v5. You're one piece of the puzzle. And while you can definitely do more, go above and beyond, and carry some bad players, that doesn't mean that every single game is within your control. And you got to be okay with that. This absolutely doesn't mean that you can't climb, but it does mean that your sanity is going to be tested a bit. Now, the last up in the teammate category, I always get questions of people saying, I can't climb, I always have bad tanks, or it's always a tank diff, or it's always a DPS diff. Everyone wants to blame something, some other role for every single one of their losses. It's always a diff. Now, oftentimes, if you have a player that's getting absolutely trounced on your team, realize that they have had games where they have done the exact same thing, where they are the person who is destroying the enemy team, and it's really most often because of synergy or tempo. So this happens a lot where one player will play at a certain tempo, a certain speed, or a certain way that will work with one set of players, whether it's their picks or their tempo, their speed, and with another set of players, it just doesn't work. So if you can become a player that is more adaptable, this is going to happen to you far less. Now, it's not always going to be something that you could deal with, not always going to be something that you can control, but it is important that just sometimes changing up your play style, your tempo, your speed, your picks can fundamentally make it so a tank or a DPS or a support or whatever the case may be that looked terrible at the start is all of a sudden popping off. And it's kind of on you if you want to be the one that wants to climb consistently, because they could take their 50-50 win rate, their wins and losses all day to the bank. But if you want to climb, you're going to have to be the difference maker. Now, I want to make it clear that ELO Hell technically does exist, just not in the way you think. I always encourage players to have personal accountability for their wins and losses. Do everything you can to improve, learn, get better, and be the difference maker in your games. But I will say that comp as a whole is just a bad learning environment. You make a mistake one game and you get punished. You make a mistake, the exact same mistake in the next game, and it pops off and works. This makes learning really, really difficult in the environment of ranked. And unless you're learning from somewhere outside of ranked, whether it's VOD reviews, whether it's watching streamers and trying to apply specific things that they're doing, not everything, because it's not always applicable, especially if they're high ranked streamers, and trying to watch videos and educate yourself to become a better player, you have to combine your outside of game knowledge with your games, because you need to find some sort of objectivity in learning how to play matchups, how you should ideally be playing an engagement when players play it correctly so that you can learn. And it requires you to do your due diligence, which is part of what you're doing right now watching this video. But yeah, if you're someone that only grinds ranked, doesn't learn anything outside of ranked, it's just going to be in a learning environment that you will learn from but not always correctly and not always very quickly. Now, the next thing that we need to talk about is toxicity. This is another thing that a lot of people bring up to me in chat. They say, it's super, super toxic. I just can't stand it. I don't want to communicate because people are toxic. People are just blaming me for whatever happens wrong. The first thing that goes wrong, they yell at me, whatever the case may be. Now, I will say, first off, a lot of it is just mindless noise. Like, just either ignore it or mute it or leave comms, whatever you got to do, because it's actually just useless things that people are saying. They don't know the right play. They don't know what you should be doing. They're spouting out like they know, but most of the time they don't even play your main. So why would they know? Why would they know what you're supposed to be doing? They just want to do what benefits them from their point of view. And especially when it's like attacks or things like that, there is literally 0 point in listening to any of that shit at all. It's only going to frustrate you, make you play worse, get you tilted. And yeah, I understand that it's a frustrating aspect of comp, but it's just kind of the reality of ranked multiplayer. People like to point the blame game and be toxic for no reason. Now, I will say something that always makes me feel better is I take and channel the negativity that I receive in my games, and I channel those into my next games. I press that avoid button, I go into my next games with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, and that's always the greatest. That's always the greatest. Like the other day on stream, I got roasted by a freaking DPS Mercy duo, and they just roasted the shit out of me, and then I proceeded to win like 6 games after that in a row. So that's my validation, that's my vindication, and it feels good. So that's just a way to kind of take toxicity and kind of flip it. But most of the time, if people aren't actually trying to communicate towards getting that win, keeping the vibes up, or trying to problem solve so that y'all actually ultimately win, there's no point in even listening to it at all. Now, the next thing that we need to talk about is just being mentally tired of it. A frustrating experience, you're burnt, you're tired of the wins and losses, and most of the time, you just need to realize that you're burnt out. You've been grinding a little bit too much, you've been playing a little bit too hard, you've been experiencing ranked and all of its RNG, the wins and losses, the triumphs. You might be improving, but it doesn't mean you're having a good time. And you need to quickly realize that you're getting overly tilted about small stuff. You're getting passive aggressive. You're getting mad even when you just initially start losing and you already think you lost the game. This is not the right mindset to be in. And if you feel this way, most of the time it's best for you to take a break, take a breather, go walk around, relax, clear your head, or maybe even take the entire day or multiple days off. Because if you allow yourself to keep going, grinding with that mindset, you're going to slowly kind of spiral down and probably become some of these same toxic people that you so desperately wanted to avoid before. So yeah, it's a vicious cycle, but you need to be the one to break it. And last up, we need to talk about winners and losers queue, which is something that a lot of people attest to, but in reality doesn't really exist, at least in the traditional sense. Now, I will say, when you go on giant win streaks, your MMR is going to spike, and then it's going to put you in a game where you are required to be the person that is going to carry. Most of the time, that does happen because you're winning so much. The game's like, oh, this person deserves a higher rank. Let's test the waters. Let's put them in a rank or a game where they need to be the difference maker. They need to be that X much MMR in order to prove themselves. And a lot of times, these are hard games. So you could say, hey, that's loser's queue at work. They are going to throw me into loser's queue because I've been winning too much. But you could also say, this is the test. This is where it's like, hey, if you can win this game, you deserve a higher rank. We're giving it to you. We're giving you the opportunity to carry. So it's about mindset, right? Because you can 100% run into these games and they're hard. They're freaking hard. But you can still overcome them and win them. And that's really the only way to break out a loser's queue, quote unquote loser's queue, is by winning through it. You have to try your best. You have to keep going. And most of the time, if you go back and look at like 4 losses in a row, 5 losses in a row that you had, and you're like, I was just in loser's queue, go back, watch those VODs, watch each one of them back, look at all the times that you died, look at your ultimate use, and you tell me that there was absolutely no way you could have won any of those games. If you played better consistently throughout all your deaths and all your fights, I promise you that at least one of them, probably 2, 3, maybe even all of them, you could have changed the outcome on these games and broke yourself out of quote-unquote loser's queue. So part of this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you're giving winners and losers queue power by acknowledging its existence rather than just focusing on what you can do, what you can learn, how you can improve and win every single game you're in. And I think that's the best way to break through quote unquote loser's queue. And overall, realize that at the end of the day, all of this is just self-betterment, trying to make yourself the best player you can be. And if you need a vote of confidence, I believe in you 100%. And yeah, absolutely best of luck grinding.